All right, welcome everyone back to our study of the Gospel of Mark. We are in Mark chapter 10 today. So we're in the third of three lessons that we're doing on the section called On the Way to Jerusalem. This is chapters 8 through 10, and it's after the series of sections that were focused on Jesus' identity and authority, and now he has turned his face to Jerusalem, and we get this section that it's got another bracket. We're going to talk about that tonight, and it's structured around repetition, right? So let's look back at chapters 8 and 9 that we covered our last two lessons and kind of think about the structure a little bit to start. So if we look at this starts in 8:22. With the healing of the blind man of Bethsaida. And what was unusual about that healing?
He was partially healed and then completely healed.
Right. This is the guy who says, I see people, they look like trees walking around, right? It's such a funny, quirky comment. But that partial healing. So the healing of this blind man, and we talked about how the partial healing and then the completion sort of pointed to the limited understanding of the disciples and promised a complete understanding as they matured in the faith, right? Okay. And then we get the first of these three sections next, where Peter confesses Jesus as the Messiah, as the Christ. And then Jesus does what immediately? Verse 31.
He starts telling them about the suffering he's going to go through and ultimate death.
Yeah, his prediction of his death. So that prediction of the passion is kind of the structural point that it's repeated in each of these chapters. And it may be a little bit kind of coincidental with the way the verses come later. Those are translator choices. Those are assigned much later than the writing of the original text, but it's like 8:31, 9:30, and 10:32 or so. Like it's always the 30, 31 around in there. So we get one in chapter 8, one in chapter 9, and one in chapter 10. It's the structure that this section, that repetition is built around. And every time he gives this information, right? He says, especially in this first one, it says he's speaking plainly about this. He's telling them plainly what's going to happen. And then he goes into a teaching section. So teaching is a really strong element all the way through, right? Last week we did chapter 9. We saw the transfiguration. Maybe we would put that in parallel with the Great Confession, right? And then this healing, and then he starts telling them about his prediction of the passion and immediately goes into a teaching section. All about discipleship. It's about discipleship. And so now he's been teaching, and we move into chapter 10. So thoughts on chapters 8 and 9 and what we did last time. I wanted to do a little review because we've had spring break in between, but anything stand out to you or that has been on your mind since then? Well, let's start with chapter 10. Someone read for us chapter 10, verses 1 through 12.
Well,
thank you.
Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "What does Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But in the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. He answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the Pharisees, so we have sort of the continuation of teaching, right? He had been teaching. We had the whole salt and light kind of section right before this, and he left that place. He goes to another place. Again, the crowds of people came to him, right? We have our crowds, our repetition of the crowds. They're seeking him. But the Pharisees come, and what is their motivation? Verse 2.
Testing him.
They're testing him, right? Why is this a test?
Because they know what the answer is.
Okay, what do they know about the answer?
But they're just saying, I think they're just saying if he gives them the same, gives the same answer, or if it's different,
Right, like there's a debate between some rabbis about divorce at this time, so they may have thought that he might, get into that and somehow maybe get in trouble that way. What's the other? We know of a political situation that sort of has to do with divorce that is going on at this time. Remember what happened with John the Baptist? Mark tells us about it. Where is that? It's 6:14, or maybe 6:17. If you want a reminder, you can turn back there. But what was the deal with John the Baptist? How did he get in trouble with Herod?
Oh, his brother Philip's wife was his wife.
Yeah, so there's a situation with his divorce, and maybe she leaves her brother and comes and marries him. And so how did that turn out for John the Baptist?
Not very well.
Yeah,
he told her she was wrong. She was sinning,
Yeah, he spoke up and it was not appreciated. And how'd he end up?
Headless.
Yeah, beheaded, right? Like he lost his life over these politics. So it may be that they are trying to get Jesus in trouble in that way as well, right? Or it may be debate between rabbis. So the history about the way that this was viewed at the time. It was never in question whether a man could end his marriage by divorce. It was a given, whether in ancient society or in Mosaic law, right? Like there's just like, so the passage that they talk about is when someone divorces his wife, he must give her a certificate of divorce, right? So so it presupposes that some people are going to divorce, right? Adultery, divorce was something only a man could do in Jewish society and in many ancient societies. Like a woman doesn't get to initiate. Divorce is not something that a woman gets to initiate, right? Like we sometimes think about a divorce in an egalitarian way, but it was not, right? This was something that only a man could do, is divorce a woman. And there were two schools of rabbinic thought about it. So one said that it was only permissible for unfaithfulness. So if a woman was unfaithful, then a man could divorce her. Nothing said about a man being unfaithful, right? Like, because this is not fair. And then the other school of thought was, for any reason, a man could just decide to divorce his wife, even if he just tired of her. So which do you suppose was the more popular way of thinking?
Well, with the men, I'm sure it was.
Yeah. Right? For any reason, it was so the majority is in the camp of for any reason, because it's much more convenient, it's much more desirable to be able to just do what you want. But think about divorce from the standpoint of a woman. How would a divorce affect a woman?
She has no one to support her.
Yeah. What do you say, Amy?
It would ruin her.
Mhm.
Yeah, it would have been devastating. This is not a process that had to go through any legal body. You know, if in our society you have to go apply, you have to go through, like, it's a legal dissolving that has to, and it has a certain time frame. This is like you write a receipt, you know, like, I'm going to sell you this at my garage sale and I'm going to write you a receipt. Like, the level of legality is just write something down saying that she's officially divorced. So there's really no protection for women in this. It could have been devastating if a woman is divorced, the most she would ever be given would be her dowry, and that would, like, some lump sum equivalent to her dowry if she wasn't accused of unfaithfulness, and that wasn't even required. So she's left without recourse. And this could, you know, and if someone was doing this merely because they were tired of the wife, you know, you see how abusive this is in the power structure of the day, right? Also, adultery was viewed, like, the way that adultery was thought of is, this is an offense that can only be committed against a man. So a man is either, adultery is either depriving a husband of his exclusive sexual rights to his wife, or depriving a father of a marriageable virgin daughter, right? Nobody says you can commit adultery against a woman. It's a male-dominated society, and it's only committed against a man. And so there's a real disparity between male and female, and the protections that society gives just as the status quo, right? We know that. Okay, so the Pharisees come and say, like, well, what do you say about this? And what does Jesus do?
He turns it around and says, well, this is why God created marriage.
Right. So they are referring, so he says that, you know, first he turns it back on them, like, well, what did Moses tell you? And they refer to this passage. This is from Deuteronomy 24, 1-4, about this certificate of divorce. This was to offer some small measure of protection for the woman, but, you know, it's pretty limited, right? And Jesus, when in answering that, what does he say about the Mosaic law? Verse 5.
That it was because they had been hardened, their hearts were hardened.
Right.
Well,
So how favorably or highly does that statement regard the law?
Kind of diminishes it.
Yeah.
Oh, Moses wrote it, so, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, did he write it just like out of his head? Like, where did it come from when Moses wrote it? He goes up on the mountain, he's with God, he spends that time with God, God instructs him, and the Mosaic law comes out of that instruction from God. And so it's not like it's a purely human endeavor. And yet you make a really good point. It's like Jesus implies that the law itself is just an accommodation to what their abilities to keep it are, right? That the law is what it is because of their weakness. So that would not be the highest view of the law that they would be used to thinking, right? He's thinking of the law in a very different way than they are. And you notice when he tells what should be right, does he go back to that passage in the law or another passage in the law? What does he go back to?
the original intent by God.
Mhm.
Yeah, from creation, right? So he says like, let's go back to the ideal that God created you to be, right? What did God create? What did God want for man and woman in his original design, right? In the Eden of the world, right? And what does he say God created?
Created man and woman.
Mhm.
Yeah, how does that sound when you're talking about equality versus like a male dominated society, which kind of
It's more equality because two would become one, meaning
Mhm.
two equals become a whole, or two equal parts become a whole, not any
yes,
one lesser.
right. It's very different, right? It doesn't sound like men do this and women are stuck with it. It sounds like they're partners, right? It says he made them male and female. It's a parallel from creation that puts them in this sense of like each man and woman are each made in the image of God, right? And then this idea that they become one flesh implies like some partnership. This is speaking towards equality in a society that had no designs towards that at all, right? And so what Jesus is saying is really quite radical. He's saying that God had a design for man and woman to be together in partnership, and that the law version is really more of the accommodation to the weakness of mankind. So it's a big, how do you think the Pharisees might think about his answer?
They don't like it, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, it doesn't really say like, and then they got so angry they wanted to kill him, like it has said so many times before, but I think we're in that range, don't you? Like this is hitting them in their power, like he has done in so many different ways once again.
Aren't the Pharisees real pro Moses? And so even if you're comparing Moses to God, you challenge their authority.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
very legalistic. So if it's in the law, they want to follow the law.
Yes, yeah. They were really a group that was known as being of the people, but what they thought was going to help the people is if you just follow the law really closely, you'll be right with God. They're like, let me help you. This is how I'm going to help you get right with God. Follow every rule of the Mosaic law. And so, yes, like the law is thought of very highly, and that's not how Jesus talks about it. It's like his teaching in the nature of who God is and how God created, and his interpretation of that teaching is supersedes the version that God gave to Moses. Yeah, so it's radical. And then he takes the disciples and teaches them more, right? Verse 10, when they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. Like it's still on their mind. This is like, whoa, this is wild stuff, right? They're still thinking about it. And then how does this answer that Jesus gives in verse 11 and 12, how does this differ from the societal view?
That a man can commit adultery against his wife.
Yeah, it's equal.
Unparalleled in ancient society. Nobody would say this. This was radical teaching to put them on the same plane in this way. Right? And so Jesus doesn't, some have said that this means that there is no divorce. Divorce doesn't exist. Well, that's not what's here, right? He says if there's divorce, then there's some sin here, right? And so what he's saying is not that divorce doesn't exist or that it's unforgivable, but he's saying that anything that is not a man and a woman in true partnership with each other is not reaching the pinnacle of God's design for man and woman. And so he really get this contrast, right? The Pharisees came asking, what can we do? What can we get away with? What's the most freedom that we have to do what we want? And Jesus says, how can you most stay close to God's way, in the way of God's creation? How do you stay? And it's paralleled in so many ways, right? So what do we sometimes want to know, like, what's the most I can do and not be wrong? Whereas, as Jesus' teaching way is, how can I be closest to God and his intent for me, for my wholeness? Thoughts, comments?
It reminds me a lot of the adulterous woman.
Of
Would
what?
be the same- The adulterous woman, it would be like the same situation type thing, and like I'm thinking that Nietzsche, a preacher, had mentioned recently, he talked about that. He says, well, what about the man?
Yeah. Well, and society wouldn't ask that, right? But Jesus, we know that the desire for wholeness and for behavior that is pure, Jesus has just said, like, if your hand causes you to sin, it's not worth it. You'd rather that the most important thing is to enter the life of the kingdom of God. Right. All right, let's read 13 through 16.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
People were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and he said to them, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs as such to these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it. And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them.
Okay. So who's coming to Jesus here? Says people. Who do we think?
Followers?
Yeah, who's bringing children?
I'm thinking it's the Gentiles, because the Jews, children are second-class citizens. They're not.
Absolutely. Children are not emphasized and elevated in ancient society like they are sometimes often in our society. We're like, oh, let the kids go first. And they're like, children aren't real people, right? They're just, you're right, they're second-class citizens. So people are bringing little children. So who might care enough about a little child to bring them to Jesus?
Probably their mom.
Yeah. These are, I'm sure that it's at least parents, and maybe.
And Jesus was indignant. He was.
Oh, yeah, indignant. Although I was gonna. Does anyone have a different word for there in the middle of 14? Jesus saw this. He was. Everyone has indignant. It could be aggrieved or grieved much. It's it's an emotional reaction, isn't it? Why do you suppose? Well, first of all, like, why do the people want this? I'm assuming parents, it doesn't say parents, but why do they want to bring their children to Jesus?
So he could bless them.
Yeah, this idea of blessing, right? It says to have him touch them. And we've seen over and over that Jesus' touch brings healing, brings wholeness, brings a relief of the demons. Like, there's so many ways that Jesus's touch has been so powerful. And they are longing for this blessing for their children. And the disciples rebuke them. Why do you suppose that is?
He can't be bothered with them.
Right? They're just not important enough. If he really wants to work on his Messiah cause, he needs to spend time with important people. And these are not the important people. Yeah, I think so. And why else?
Well, were all the disciples Jewish? Because then they would have had that idea that, the children would be lesser then, I guess. Like,
Yeah, and Gentiles
don't
would.
worry about the kids,
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that second class citizen, definitely. And all the disciples were Jewish, but this would have been, I mean, even if the Gentiles thought this way too. But
Okay.
yes, yeah, that second class citizen. And then why else? Like, do they have a lot of free time, the disciples and Jesus?
No, they're always surrounded by everyone. They're tired.
Have to be exhausted, right? It says they didn't have leisure even to eat. They're like getting into the boat to get some space from the crowds. It is constant, right? This mention of crowds in Mark is telling us that the ministry of Jesus was just unrelenting, with people coming to him and wanting, right? And so in some ways, like I want to like make myself give some compassion to the disciples for their response, right? It seems a little heartless. And I think Jesus is not pleased with that response. So it wasn't great. But on the other hand, like they are tired. They are being pursued constantly by these crowds and pressed in on him. The diseased are reaching out to touch him. And so they had to have been exhausted. And so the last thing they need is the thing you want when you're exhausted, all the children hanging on you. Maybe, right? It can be very tiring. And so I think they probably had a kind of a regular human response here. But Jesus is indignant or aggrieved. Why?
Because they're important, and they're probably, in this instance, the closest to God from a innocence standpoint than anybody else.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, Jesus had places these values on them, right? Remember, just in the last chapter, 9:36, he took a little child and had him stand among them, and taking him in his arms, he said to him, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me." So there is, he's been trying to teach them the least of these are actually the people who matter. Remember, it's the upside down kingdom, the kingdom where the second class citizens are the ones that we actually pursue. And there's a real sense of tenderness, both there, taking the little child in his arms, and then here again, 10:16. And he took the children in his arms and he put his hands on them and he blessed them, right? Very, he is willing to stop and spend the time for the least of these. And he really shows it in his, even in what I assume would have had to be an exhausted state. Thoughts, comments?
Well, I like how it says, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Like, you have to have the, like you said, the innocence and the awe and wonder of just the newness and the appreciation of the, the gift that is, the kingdom.
Well, and what's the other characteristic of a child, right? A child is also, like, what do y'all think of? What can you think of? What makes a child the one who receives the kingdom?
These children are so dependent. They're used to having to have someone help them.
They
And
have to. Yeah.
Or a curiosity and an awe of not just like, this is how it's always been. That's not going to happen. That's always how it is. They have this like appreciation of like the awe and wonder and an openness about it.
Yeah, great points, both. The dependence is very, a child depends on their parents because they don't have any choice, right? That's all they have. We see that's what's so tragic when a parent is neglectful or abusive, right? Because the child doesn't have any other options, right? And so there is that need we see, like when we I mean, sometimes we fool ourselves and think we got a lot of options besides God, right? But what's the truth of the matter? Like, our creator is our sustainer. We don't actually have other options.
Mm-mm.
And
It's like Jesus. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
It's like Jesus says, we need to have that childlike faith.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. And not a faith that isn't trained, like Terry talked about curiosity, wonder. I mean, there's definitely a joy in learning, right? From children, right? It's not just an ignorant, we're not elevating ignorance, but we're saying openness to be dependent on God and to learn, to continue to learn. Because this is, right, he's just teaching all the way through. This is a section that's very focused on teaching. He continues to teach. Interesting that this leads right into our next little story. Someone read 17 through 31 for us.
I'll read.
Thank you.
And as he was setting out on his journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and mother." And he said to him, "Teacher, all these I have kept from my youth." And Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, "You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." Disheartened by this saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions.
Okay. So as you know, we talked about how Jesus has been teaching on discipleship. So in this section, we get like marriage, children, possessions, right? These are big elements of the life of a person, right? Just significant portions of what we need taught about, right? So he's continuing kind of in that theme. And what do you notice about the man here? Who is he compared to the little children? Like, they have no status. What about him?
He has a lot of status. He's wealthy.
He's wealthy, so he has a lot of status. Yeah, and in fact, the account in Matthew calls him a young ruler. I don't know about yours. Mine has the rich young ruler in the section title, but of course that's not in the text. It's just a man came to him, but we learn that he is wealthy, and that he is for he had great wealth. This is in 22, right? So Mark loves to like put things side by side, alternate things that go together, that make contrast, that make connections. I think we see the children are of no status, and here is this person coming with status. He's a man, he's wealthy. How does Jesus feel about him?
He loves him.
Yeah, it's not just the status less that get Jesus's love. He gets it too, right? But what does Jesus say to him? What do you make of this?
He tells him to lose his power, his riches, his position in life, essentially.
Yeah, why do you suppose he does that? Like, is everyone supposed to be like, is everyone called to poverty? Is everyone supposed to sell all their possessions? Like, what's going on here?
What it sounds like. I've got a
think
lot of stuff to sell.
Uh-huh. I think he kind of explains it a little bit later in the chapter where it says it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle.
Right. Then for a what?
Than a
Where's
rich man to
man?
go to heaven.
rich man, right? So I think, we could probably argue that not everyone has to get rid of some of their wealth, only those of us who are dependent on our wealth. But then how would we argue our way out of being having a dependence on our wealth that rivals our dependence on God, right? So I think there's a call to the way that we treat our possessions, the way, because he is righteous, right? Jesus says you should follow the commandments. He's like, yeah, check, check, check. I've been doing it. I've been very righteous. But what he has, this is another in the like, what's the minimum I have to do? What can I get away with versus like, how do you get close to the heart of God? And he says it's hard for a rich man. And the disciples are, of course, this is in a time where wealth is equated with God's favor. And so the disciples are horrified, or, it says amazed, verse 26. Disciples were even more amazed and said to each other, who then can be saved? They're like, if those who have God's favor can't be saved, how can anybody? What's Jesus' response? Verse 27.
Impossible with man, but not with God.
Yeah, a dependence on possessions is a difficult, it's just like food, right? Like sometimes you think like, well, I'd never eat if I could just quit eating, but I have to eat to live. Right? And so like possessions are a little bit like that, right? We'd never have any dependence on our possessions if we didn't have any, but having some possessions is part of a normal life. And so we're left, I think, to return to the idea of dependence on God as we contemplate that. And, of course, Peter has to say, we left everything, right? And Jesus says, yeah. He doesn't diminish that, right? He doesn't rebuke him. He says, you will receive many times more, 100 times as much, and in the age to come, eternal life. But he ends with, but many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. The upside down kingdom, the reversal. So we're getting that sense of return to the dependence on God. And of course, that leads him into, we talked about the structure of this section, that leads him into this third prediction. So let's read that. Someone read for us 32 through 34.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. And he will deliver them to the Gentiles, and they will mock him, and they will spit upon him, and scourge him, and kill him. And 3 days later, he will rise again.
Okay, thank you. So verse 32, what's our geographical note? What's the journey?
Still on the way to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Why? I think we're mentioning this here for a reason, right? Why?
Well, he's getting ever closer to being crucified.
Yeah.
Walking into it.
It's the path to crucifixion. He's on it, right? And so,
Mhm.
as they mentioning Jerusalem, he's like funneling into this future that he is telling them is going to happen. And how are the disciples feeling?
They're getting used to it. He's been bringing this up every so often.
Right? You would think they'd be like, got it. But instead, what it says they're what?
Afraid.
We're fearful.
They're fearful, they're afraid. And then one more thing.
They're amazed.
They're astonished,
Astonished.
they're amazed, right? Yeah, you can use either word works for that translation, but yeah, they are still really they're scared and they're surprised and they're astonished. The emotions are running high here, and I don't think they quite understand. And yet, what is Jesus' prediction like here? Is it kind of abstract?
He told him exactly what's going to happen, but
Right.
Very specific.
Very. What specific notes do we get out of this?
Betrayed.
mhm. That's the chief priests and the teachers will turn him over to the Gentiles. And
Mhm.
Right.
Will be
He'll rise again.
Specifically, this is the first mention of the Gentiles, right? I heard something. Go ahead and repeat whoever said that.
Oh, he's going to be mocked, spit on, flogged, killed.
Mhm.
Yeah, the whole bit, even the spitting, right? It's very specific, right? And I think, why do you think he's telling them, like, why is he including the detail of the Gentiles? Why is he telling them flogged, spit on, mocked? Like, what's the point of giving them all of that?
Because they don't understand.
mhm.
Yeah, they don't.
It's
Go
to
ahead.
prepare them.
Yeah, to prepare them.
So that when it happens, what would they tend to think? If they hadn't been prepared, what might they think?
They were following someone that was not who they believed he was, that he wasn't Jesus.
Yeah, if all this could happen, he must be a fraud, right? Like if he must not be God's chosen one, or else why would all this stuff happen to him? And so the preparation is allowing them to later look back, right? The whole book is written looking back from a sense of, yes, we would normally think that if all these things happen to someone, it must be because they aren't the Messiah. But he's telling them this is happening exactly because I am the Messiah, right? It's the nature of Messiahship. He's retraining them on what that is and allowing them to look back and say, like, oh, Jesus said this would happen. It hasn't all fallen apart like they would tend to think, right? Like
It
that.
happened just like he said it would.
Yeah.
Mhm. I like at the end where he says, and then he would rise again on the third day.
Mhm.
Yes. And I'm not sure they were really even looking for him to rise again. Like he told them plainly. And yet when he does it, everybody's like, I think you should double check that. Like they don't understand it. And yet they have this to look back to reference, to say, like, okay, this is as he said it would be.
Well, and I can't get on to him for not getting it, because
Oh, right.
I wouldn't have gotten it. I mean, without knowing the end, things come as a surprise.
Think about all of the varying theories about the second coming of Jesus. Like we have
Mhm.
biblical passages about Jesus' return, and yet we know we don't get it. And we know there's like all of these different ways of thinking about it that conflict with each other, and they can't all be right. And yet they all say, like, oh, well, this is straight. Like, we don't know. How could we? Right. And so they, as they're living it, how could they know? Yeah, great
Mhm.
point. Remember the first prediction of the crucifixion and resurrection. Peter rebukes him, right?
Mhm. He's like, quit talking like that.
And then he has to go and rebuke Peter. Okay. So we've seen there's some parallels here. What's the next? What happens right after this? What's it lead into? Verse 35.
Oh, that's where James and
Oh.
John were trying to say that they want to be on the right, left hand of God.
Right.
We want to be important.
Right. It's so backwards, right? It's just what Jesus has been teaching against, but this is what Mark does, right? He puts these stories together so that we see them in a light, and it's humorous in a way, right? So just as he's saying that he's going to go through the suffering, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, teacher. And of course they do the thing, right, that people always do, like, I want you to do something, promise me you'll do something for me, right? I don't know how likely it is that he's going to promise before they tell him what it is, although he's Jesus, maybe he knows. What do you want me to do for you? They reply, let one of us sit on your right and the other on your left in your glory. Well, they think his glory is something different than I think maybe Jesus is referring to about his glory, right? Because when Jesus talks about his glory, he's including the suffering, right? We talked about that. He's including the sacrifice, and the laying down of his own life for the salvation of others, right? And so his glory, like they may think this term a little wrongly. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answer. And Jesus said, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. What is he talking about?
You're going to be martyred.
Yeah, they're going to go through some of the suffering that he himself will go through. Like this has been a pattern go along and along, that when he talks about his suffering, he says, and my followers will suffer as well, right? But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. Who's Jesus talking about there?
I always figured it was God and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, I think there could be multiple meanings here. Yeah, that would be one. That would be in exaltation, right? Because Jesus goes through the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection, and his exaltation. What about in the crucifixion?
The two thieves.
Yeah. I think even the two thieves God has been preparing them for their places, right and left on the side of Jesus, right? So when the 10 heard about this, they became what?
Indignant.
Yes, they are indignant with James and John, right? So Jesus reserves his indignation for people who don't understand what the law is for, people who don't care about the least of these. They're busy being indignant because they're jealous, right? That they want to be the greatest, and it's parallel with the last one where they didn't want to tell Jesus what they were arguing about because they were arguing about who was the greatest. And so he calls them together and said, you know that those who regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, right? He understands where they are. He understands their immature state. And we live there sometimes, don't we? And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Well, who's going to do that? Jesus is first in line. Right? And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Okay, what is Jesus saying with this little piece here? Oh, Becky, you're muted.
You're not going to be great. I mean, don't.
In a human way, right?
Don't think too much of
Be
yourself.
more servants. They're not going to be rulers or anything like that.
It's not about becoming rulers. You don't think of yourself so much and try to be the greatest. Yeah, Terry. What else?
You'll be first, will be last.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, starting with Jesus himself, right? He says, for even the Son of Man, right? He's using this term. We've talked about coming in the clouds with glory. It's a term that implies being given dominion and exaltation, and yet Jesus has used it in parallel with his servanthood, with his sacrifice, with his suffering. And he says, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. What is a ransom? Well, this is a good passage that tells us something about what the cross means, what it does. How does it work?
Well, you pay money to get somebody back.
Okay.
As a payment for freedom.
Mhm.
A payment for freedom. So you get somebody back. What situation are they in that they have to be gotten back?
Well, they've been kidnapped.
Usually, yeah. So that they're like somehow in bondage, in slavery, in capture, right? So that they need a ransom. So who needs ransomed in this situation? Like who why is a ransom needed?
Because the wages of sin are death.
Okay. So as it's, you remember, like everyone who sins is a slave to sin. So as you know, Jesus is all about like go for wholeness, not rules, right? And the rules, you end up following the rules. It's not like you break all the rules, right? You follow the rules because you are in a state of living as God meant you to be, as you were created to be. And so the righteous living comes naturally from a wholeness of following God. So when we sin, we're pulled out of that. We're in that slavery to sin and death. We're in that defeat, right? He's like the opposite of wholeness with God is defeat in sin. And so that ransom is the rescue, right? It's the price of rescue. So that we see that how Jesus thinks of the cross as is a way to pay a price, to have the victory, to bring us back from what destroys our life into a life of wholeness, into a life that is lived in the way God created us to be from the creation, right? This section of teaching kind of like flows from as God meant us to be in the beginning. So Jesus ransoms us back to be as his people, created to live as he always wanted us to live.
We have to remember too, in the Old Testament, they had to have sacrifices. They had to sacrifice animals. But because of Jesus, we no longer have to do that.
Once for all. Yes, it's done, right? And so it's a ransom, it's a victory, it's a healing. It's parallel to all of his healings, right? That he brings us back. And then we get the close of the section, right? How to go back to 8, what did we say, 8:22? And we saw that the section opened with, in Bethsaida, what happened?
The blind man.
Yeah, healing of the blind man.
Blind man. And so now, 10:46, we're bracketing the section with another healing of a blind man. Let's read this right quick. Someone read 46 through 52.
I will.
And they came to Jericho. Who was starting?
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Becky.
Okay. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road.
Doesn't this bring together so many of the themes that we've talked about, right? We spent so much time with Jesus and his identity, right? And what does the blind man shout?
Have mercy on me.
Yes, Son of David, have mercy on me. That, remember that in Ezekiel, God promises that the Son of David will come to shepherd his people. And when Jesus kind of refers to that. He's talking about they're like sheep without a shepherd. And so he's the son of David, have mercy on me. And that idea that he wants what Jesus is offering, the mercy that he's shown to the children, to the least of these, to the unauthorized disciple we talked about. I think that was last week, and how that's he asks for it, and he's willing to say, he's willing to be dependent on Jesus. He says, Rabbi, I want to see. And Jesus commends him for that. Your faith has healed you. And so the blind men, they see better than the disciples, right? We have that little contrast, that reversal. The physically blind have the spiritual understanding. Amy.
Who is he?
I think he's just a random guy, and I don't know why we're told that he's son of Timaeus. Like, do we know Timaeus? Who's Timaeus? I think he is a beggar on the side of the road. But I think Mark highlights him. You know, we get the same little play of like somebody who needs Jesus is asking for him, and the disciples are like, hush, he's too important, you're a second-class citizen. And Jesus says, no, have him come over to me, call him to me. You know, it's
Just
very,
like the children, a blind man's used to being dependent on the goodness of others.
yeah. And so it may be through that dependence that they have the spiritual understanding that the people who have physical sight don't seem to have. So we kind of end the section with that idea of like, and the first will be last and the last will be first, and those who cannot see will receive their sight, and those who can but aren't willing to be dependent on God, or who worried about the greatest, or who are clinging to their possessions, or who so want their power that they would rather give up on a partnership with another person created in God's image. Those are the people who can't receive Jesus. But if you're willing, you know, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. If you're willing to follow, if you're willing to go the way of discipleship, the upside down way of the kingdom, then there is a rescue, a ransom ready for you in Jesus's path that he is walking. Great discussion tonight, everybody. Thank you. We're going to do the next section is 11, the whole section goes from 11:1 to 13:37, but we have like half of it for next week. So it'll be the triumphal entry. We won't align with Easter, sadly, because that's not what the semester does. So, but you know, no bad time to study the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, right? It's all Jesus, it's all good. So we'll do the first half next week, and then complete that section the following. So.
You have this on April 7th, you have a service day. Is that still?
Yes, that is still right.
Okay.
We have one more lesson and then a week off for a service day, and you know, we can do something specific, or we can just each, I mean, I know we have a lot of people have services that they're doing. That I kept it that way because that's how the Tuesday morning class is organized, and so we're just going to keep the same schedule for simplicity. Okay, I'm going to turn off our recorder so we can do prayers.